First of all, I want to start by welcoming everyone in the audience for joining us here today, and our guests that we have here as well. This is the DeID Summit conversation being hosted on the DeFi Club on Clubhouse. The topic today is exploring decentralized reputation and DeFi. This is a recorded event. We have today 3 guests. We have Bryan, Daniel, and Kevin. Some of you may be familiar with our guests here today. Maybe you've seen them on Clubhouse before speaking or somewhere else. But Kevin is CEO and chief roboticist at Gitcoin. Danny is the co-founder of 3boxLabs. And we have Bryan, who is the CEO and co-founder of RabbitHole. So maybe we can start by going around and having each of you introduce yourselves and say a little bit about what you're working on.
Sure. Bryan, do you want to go first, just because you're to the right of Humpty on
Sure.
Clubhouse on the stage? There you go.
Does that make you feel easier, Kevin?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so I'm Bryan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of RabbitHole. We make it easier for people to participate into crypto networks and are about incentivizing people to go do things instead of just speculate and trade shitcoins. So really excited to be here to talk about reputation, mainly coming it from the application angle. So why should certain applications implement reputation and how they sort of fit into the identity stack.
Cool. I'm Danny. I'm one of the co-founders of 3boxLabs. I've been working in the space for 4 years and working on identity for a little longer than that. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about reputation. Our work is more directly focused on decentralized identity and how you can link information to identities in a really flexible and dependable way. And we really view that as the basis for all kinds of reputation systems and open up all kinds of possibilities.
Hey, I'm Kevin Owocki of Gitcoin, which is a place that you can get coins if you're a software engineer working on open source software. We are building Gitcoin Grants, which is, I think, one of the largest crowdfunding platforms in crypto, which moves about $4 million per quarter to open source software developers. And Gitcoin Grants is built on top of quadratic funding, which is an economic model that is really great at funding public goods, but it requires identity. And so been thinking a lot about Sybil resistance in the context of quadratic funding, and super happy to be here with really amazing people. Humpty, thank you so much for setting this up. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. I think I've been familiar with Gitcoin for quite a long time, but as I've been exploring decentralized identity, I have become familiar with everyone here on this stage. So I'm pretty excited to be sharing this stage with all of you and having this conversation. I think that it's still not as widely recognized as, say something like Bitcoin and DeFi. In terms of how reputation can enable a more dynamic, rewarding, and better solution in the future. So in terms of DeFi, so I really am excited to talk to all of you and kind of dive into the topic. So I think for the benefit of everyone here today, maybe we can start by defining some of these terms. And the term that I think is probably less recognized is decentralized identity. Now, I think, Daniel, maybe I'll put it to you first because I read on your blog, which is hosted on the Ceramic Network, your article called Demystifying Digital Identity. So maybe you can kick it off and talk a little bit about what that is and maybe some of the misunderstandings, or just take it from here.
Yeah, I'll try and be a bit shorter than I was in that blog, but I'm happy to kick it off. So I think when people talk about identity, whether it's in the decentralized space or even in the traditional web space, or frankly, just whenever identity is talked about generally, it can mean so many different things that it's hard to get on the same footing. And so if we focused on identity in the context of applications, or even in the context of the applications we envision for Web3, it can still mean so many different things. It can mean anti-Sybil systems, so you only have one person in a network. It can mean anti-spam and anti-fraud more generally. It can mean authentication, which is really the ability to know that the person or entity on the other side has some secret. It's the same person that you expect it to be. It can be about targeting and personalization, which comes back to data associated to an identifier. It can be legal identity, all of these things. There's people working in the space, dozens, hundreds of them, who are working on each of these problems, which are highly related, but they each require different solutions. And so trying to define them all as identity doesn't really get precise enough. So that's the first thing. But then when you want to talk about identity and how they all relate together, I think there's really two ways to do it. You can either say identity is the union of all of those things. So you put all of those different problems and challenges and opportunities into the bucket of identity. And they are all related to identity, but the reality is each of them are going to call for different solutions, and each of them are going to need custom built things, and applications and users and networks and countries are all going to have their own requirements. And so I find it a little bit more useful to reduce identity, at least at the starting point base layer, to what's the intersection between all of those different things. Because if we can find the common ground between them, then we can at least make them interoperable and composable and be able to draw on each other, so that the data that's used for targeting can also be used for reputation scores, could also feed into anti-Sybil algorithms. And so in my mind, and the way that I tend to think about it, the way we think about it in building Ceramic Network and IDX, is at its most fundamental, identity is the ability to dependably link information to an identifier in an open system in a way that doesn't require trust on any other party. And you can take that infinite number of ways, different types of information, different types of identifiers, different ways that you compute on that information and use it. But anything that is linking information to an identifier and then using it in some way is kind of the primitive for identity as we think about it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good explanation of it. Bryan, did you have maybe something that we can add to that in terms of maybe how RabbitHole looks at that and how it engages with that?
Yeah, for sure. So right now to date, we haven't done anything outside of Ethereum wallet addresses. So we fully plan on supporting things like dancing with decentralized identifiers and DIDs. But right now, we're strictly having sort of like your wallet as sort of your primary identifier in some context, where your transaction history is sort of your reputation in some cases. And the more transaction history starts to accrue, the more opportunities you have to start earning different tokens in some context. It gets a bit of a problem once you're able to link different types of information for it, where privacy actually starts to become much more important. So that's when you start or want to break apart wallets and DIDs apart in that context. So I think for now, we're strictly focused on transaction history as sort of your reputation, and being able to earn reputation can be more opportunities, but eventually going more towards that route Dan described.
Great, thank you. Kevin, anything to add?
Yeah, so I'm interested in this in two different vectors. The first is Sybil resistance and just preventing Sybil attacks on Gitcoin grants. So that's my most immediate need, and I appreciate how thoughtful Danny is. I hope that he gives me a solution just out of the box where I can validate that someone's done a Sybil attack. But failing that, always happy to contribute Gitcoin grants, trust data, and data back into whatever upstream trust we need for that. One of my sort of long-term Hail Mary projects is that I would really like to take developer resumes and put them onto Ceramic Network or IDX Network And I just think that there's such a massive opportunity. If you look at LinkedIn, it has created a billion-dollar business, multi-billion-dollar business off of just owning your resume data and selling it to recruiters. And I would love to see crypto disrupt that and give developers a way to get contacted by recruiters, but to make money off of their own data instead of some central corporation rent seeking everyone's resume data. So the civil resistance thing is my most immediate fire to put out, but long term, I'd love to see Gitcoin disrupt LinkedIn, and especially with developers, give them a better way of routing themselves to work opportunities. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space, and I'm just really thankful that people like Danny have been thinking about it for several years, and Ontology Network as well. And so I think the future is really bright for decentralized identity as long as we keep pushing for adoption of these services.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point, and I think maybe in a little bit I'm going to ask you to define, these Sybil attacks as you see them on Gitcoin, because I think maybe not everyone in the audience understands what that is. But in terms of what you're talking about, the whole concept of decentralized identity is I guess there's various facets, right? There are documents that go beyond just the data that we accumulate over time when we interact with DeFi. It goes outside of that. It's much broader. And I have seen several conversations being had on the topic that you just mentioned, and certainly one that is ripe for disruption and can bring a lot more utility to the cryptosphere on chain. And that is, your portfolio, your works on chain. Gitcoin has a reputation for being, this host and home for development on chain. And it would be fantastic to see that information being readily available and recognized outside of, our smaller audience in crypto and more in the general, workplace, I guess. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, this civil resistance that you talk about, because I think in the article that Danny wrote, he kind of covered that a little bit, and he also may have mentioned it in his introduction. So how do you see, this civil? Well, first of all, what is that, and how do you see, decentralized identity and reputation solving that?
Sure, totally. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say with decentralized reputation, first, do no harm. Like, if anyone's private data got leaked into an immutable network, then I would just feel really awful about that. And I think that we're treading pretty carefully here, having user data, because we don't want to do any harm. So that's principle number one. But with respect to the civil resistance problem, basically what it is that Gitcoin Grants has a matching pool that's deployed every quarter. And the whole idea is that we fund public goods with this matching pool contemporaneously with a crowdfunding campaign. And the crowdfunding campaign results inform where the matching pool goes. And basically, the are is that the more identities contribute to a project, the more of the matching pool a project will get. And so that's really powerful because it optimizes for projects that have a broad swath of support. But it also is dangerous because if you can manufacture new identities, then you can swing the matching pool to be allocated to a project that maybe isn't as popular, but you faked it. And so that's the civil resistance problem. You could also think of it as sock puppet resistance is really what we're working on at Gitcoin.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think there are opportunities and advantages to having multiple identities, but certainly when it comes to something like what you're describing, you want to ensure that the person behind, that identity is real and that they're not gamifying, right, that system to their advantage.
Right. Yeah, totally. And, Vitalik has a really great post about identity in which he talks about all of the different ways that identities could be made up, all the way from like, I don't know, like a kid getting a fake ID in order to get booze, all the way up to like state level actors manufacturing identities in order to in order to attack a system. So there's a whole tree of Sybil resistance, not tree, a ladder of Sybil resistance that we need to climb up in order to solve this problem for a global digital age.
Yeah, thanks. So maybe Danny, as you and 3boxLabs and Ceramic Network are building systems to answer the call to these challenges, maybe you can add a different perspective on some of these challenges.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with everything that Kevin just said. And the general problem, I guess if we stay on anti-Sybil for a minute, is you have these open networks that are by default anonymous. They're using keys. And most in the space want them to stay at least pseudonymous. There's a whole bunch of reasons that you probably don't want to force like legal identities into a system that's designed to be open and doesn't need that. But if you have any kinds of collaboration or cooperation or governance, you need ways to, for example, like punish people if they behave against the best interests of the system. Or if you're trying to go for like one person, one vote or avoid huge plutocracy, you need to be able to identify collusion or people who are spamming the system. And so there's some really interesting efforts to build kind of specific anti-Sybil systems, like ways to have people prove they are this one key pair and only that one key pair and nowhere else in the network. There's other really interesting approaches that have been going on for years to try to kind of bring legal identities. So kind of bootstrapping one person legal identity from existing government IDs and bridging that to on-chain keys and identities. We take a little bit of a different approach, and maybe the 10-second background. We is 3boxLabs, and we've been building basically developer infrastructure for decentralized identity and data for 3 years now, mostly in the Ethereum ecosystem, but now with our upcoming network much more broadly. And we view identity as more of an emergent thing. We talked earlier about, is identity the intersection of all of those different problems or the union of them? And we think if we start with the intersection, the bare ability to attach information to an identifier in a really simple way, you start with just that, you're completely anonymous, and then you start to generate more strong identity over time as more information gets attached to it. You add more data, you add your on-chain transaction history, you get interactions with other people, maybe some linked accounts from Twitter and GitHub, maybe you get some KYC verifications, and you're starting to generate a more and more complete identity, a complete picture of your activities and history. And that's really hard to fake. If you look at Web 2, it's now much harder for people to fake a Facebook profile than fake a passport. Because you have to keep at it for a very long time. There's a proof of work to generating all this information in a credible way. And so that's the approach that we think is most promising, is to keep generating these stronger and stronger identities through transactions, through interactions, through data generated on experiences. And then folks like Kevin and the analysis that they're doing on Gitcoin grants, and Bryan and RabbitHole, who are doing reputation scoring, and a whole bunch of others, can start to look at all that data in meaningful ways and extract value out of it. Extract, probabilities that this person is a person, not a bot, or probabilities that this person is only this one identifier, not another. So that's how we approach it, which is just, this is going to get stronger and stronger over time, and it's much more probabilistic than binary.
You brought up something that I think is sometimes not widely seen as desirable in the crypto space, and that's KYC, right? Just because this space, for the most part, is built on the pseudonymous personalities and behavior. So, I think that that's very interesting. But as we move forward and we're trying to create a more robust system, right, a more verifiable system, there's certainly a place for that, to include that as part of your identity in your behavior and participation across these on-chain systems, and then create this even more robust system through multiple sources of data, like you mentioned, having your GitHub, your Gitcoin, your activity on RabbitHole as an example, which then just goes to kind of reinforce that and increase your reputation, right? So there's probably going to be places where that's absolutely necessary, but certainly there's probably places where that will not be completely necessary to attach it to that to KYC, right? I think I've also heard of some people adding social media as some sort of verifiable, document that says, hey, this person is who they say they are based on who they are on social media. So certainly different opportunities here, different ways of doing that, and different applications that will require different levels of identity, I suppose, or that multifaceted aspect of identity. Bryan, did you want to add a little bit in terms of, how this could potentially work, or you've envisioned this working with RabbitHole in the future? Because I think RabbitHole itself is also creating data, right, in terms of the people's reputation or behavior on that platform.
Yeah, I mean, the way we look at it is sort of RabbitHole being a subjective data layer on top of a more lives on top of something like ceramic, right? So it's up to us to basically aggregate and curate which data is important to the user to know, which then gives them different opportunities to then do specific work or earning opportunities in each of these different protocols. I think one of the biggest problems that DAOs across Ethereum have right now, or even other layer ones, is it's just hard to kind of start building reputation across each of these DAOs. And so the only way to get involved is to essentially just show kind of like your Web 2. I think eventually everyone will start showing like your Web 3 credentials and of kind of what you did. And other DAOs as sort of a proof of work in some context to then get entry into certain DAOs, and RabbitHole and things like Gitcoin being sort of those profiles that gives you those opportunities for work. So I see that as sort of the application layer just being a way to curate those different opportunities to then for people to kind of show off. I think the longer we wait on Web 2 to kind of get these work opportunities, the harder it is to just get more people involved in building these sustainable, decentralized organizations.
All right, great. Thank you. I think that there's even a little bit more to touch on. I think both now you, Bryan, and Danny mentioned it in terms of these DAOs and governance and how, decentralized identity and reputations can further, create a better solution in that space. But before we, I guess, jump too far into that, maybe we could talk a little bit about the second part of this conversation, which is DeFi, right? So for our listeners who may be joining us who are not familiar with what that is, can we define or describe maybe what DeFi is and, how it potentially has evolved over the last couple of years, and then we can tackle how the two intersect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that DeFi stands for decentralized finance, right? And I think that that means different things to different people. I think that the Internet of Money is going to reinvent everything that has to do with money on the internet, and it seems like so far bootstrapping open source financial system has started mostly with financial products and like the types of things that Wall Street banks would be interested in, like over collateralized loans and stable coins and financial products, which are good core primitives to build with. I think in 2017, DAI didn't even exist. There wasn't even stable coins on Ethereum, and we've just come so far since then. I would really like to see a world in which the 95% of humanity whose financial lives is their work, not their investments, can use the internet of money and create a better world for themselves and their family. And so that's kind of what I'm building towards. And I think that a lot of this like DeFi obviously has a lot of traction with people who have a lot of capital, but to me, it won't be a success until we're able to do under collateralized loans and provide value to people who don't already have a bunch of capital and money. So to me, what's cool about identity is that you can build up a resume and reputation over time, and you can start to build trust with people and interact without having a lot of capital to inject into the system. And that's why I'm excited about the intersection of identity and DeFi. But it's obviously a very open design space and things are moving really quick. So I'm curious to hear what the other speakers think.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add to that, which I guess is less about DeFi directly and more the relationship between DeFi and what we've talked about, because I'm certainly no DeFi expert. But I mean, one way to think about blockchains is just as the first way we've ever had to track state publicly. Like the internet is moving information around in packets, but until blockchains, those packets had to be stored on the edges. And for the most part, at least in Web 1, it was on people's personal computers or on-prem databases. Web 2, it's been on the cloud, largely controlled by massive tech giants or like enterprise providers. And turns out that state is really valuable because it's what you build most experiences on top of. It tracks value, it tracks information, it tracks identities. And so that's why there's so much value accumulated with the folks who control that. And blockchains give us this new way to store state publicly in a shared way. But to date, they've really just stored, for the most part, value. And that's for a whole bunch of reasons, but the blockchains to date haven't scaled all that much. They've been expensive and they hadn't proven out security. And so the use cases that made sense for them have been these financial ones because they're just natively super valuable. It's finance, as Kevin said, it's the things that interest the banks and traders and others who operate on the financial system. But as we scale blockchains and other decentralized networks, that can be IPFS and Arweave and these other storage networks, things like Ceramic and Ontology for data and identities. This is starting to track other types of state instead of just kind of financial or value transactions, information transactions, identity transactions. Now we have more and more primitives in this public domain to start to build on. And so I think that's going to kind of be a recursive loop. That's going to feed into way more interesting financial products because, as Kevin said, now we can do under collateralized lending and bring a whole bunch more people in who don't have the capital to get started that's been required to date, but also a whole bunch of ways of participating and earning in this kind of new wave of applications that aren't purely financial. So that's the piece that I'm most excited about.
Yeah, I was just going to double click on the under collateralized lending piece. I know there's like a few teams working on under collateralized lending and working on reputation scores for how that's exactly going to work. I think the thing that I'm still thinking about, and maybe Danny and Kevin have some opinions on this, is but what like composable reputation looks like. Like if like RabbitHole has some reputation score and say Arc reputation score and Gitcoin reputation score, how can each of those different DAOs and communities kind of like leverage each other's building blocks to kind of make them stronger in some cases? It's something that's been kind of discussed between a few different DeFi under collateralized lending projects, but something that can also be a problem down the road of sort of the standard problem of kind of converging around a single standard. And there's quite a possibility that that single standard of reputation can also turn negative or parasitic, and that it actually incentivizes, it could actually punish certain behavior in DeFi. So just it's one of those topics that can get very dark very quickly. And that we should be kind of like mindful of as we sort of start designing these reputation systems for under collateralized lending.
Yeah, that dark side is something that keeps me up at night, because I believe very strongly there's examples everywhere of, if whether you're talking about like the system in China where people are being kind of rated and evaluated all the time. There's the Black Mirror episode that does a fantastic job illustrating how terrible society would become if our reputations are at stake all of the time, and it's this game to accumulate points in every interaction. At the same time, I've been pretty influenced by a lot of really interesting social science and psychology work that societies tend to need reputation to function effectively. That altruistic societies don't happen because people are altruistic. They tend to happen because people gossip and people share when someone breaks the social norms, and that creates pro-social behavior. And so finding the right balance where there is reputation on the line enough to create what are basically digital societies, but not so much that it is the only thing that's driving interactions online, is a balance we need to strike.
All right. So, with the topic here, and as we've now kind of explored, decentralized identity and DeFi a bit, maybe we can dive a little bit deeper now and talk about how these reputation systems can be used for the positive, for the public good, to steal a catchphrase of Kevin. How can we leverage these two systems to create a more equitable, DeFi system?
One of the things that I'm really excited about is if you have a proof of humanity, if you have civil resistance, then you can build all sorts of digital systems that are one human, one vote, which is like, that's just directionally the definition of democracy in my mind. We have all these systems that are one CPU, one vote, or one token, one vote, which advantages people who have capital. And if you have a one human, one vote DAO, then I think that you're moving towards more digital democracy just as a core primitive. And there's tons of things that can be built on top of that that blend the interests of capital and everyday people. Quadratic funding and quadratic voting is one of those things. And I'm really excited by, actually, I wish we should have invited Santi Siri from Proof of Humanity to this panel, because I think what he's doing is really interesting. They're building UBI on top of a civil resistance mechanism. And so really curious to see where that goes. But the general trend that I think about is, how do we build tools that'll make blockchain useful to the 95% of humanity that doesn't have a ton of capital? That's sort of where I'm interested in spending a lot of my design cycles.
Yeah, I actually like that concept of one human, one vote. I think that that's something that would certainly elevate the way that DAOs behave today. Are there any projects now that we know of that may be exploring that? I think you mentioned Santi Siri. I'm not sure if they're necessarily building a DAO, but has anybody implemented something like that today that's working, or is all of that just theoretical?
So Proof of Humanity is Santi's project with Democracy Earth, and it's basically a registry where you send in a video attesting that you are a unique human and you're not part of the registry, and then people can vouch for you to get into the DAO. And it's basically a giant token curated list of Proof of Humanity. And then on top of that, they're building UBI, a token literally called UBI. So they've got 3,000 members. I wouldn't say it's proven, but it seems to be working so far.
Yeah, and there are others too, at least working towards that. Bright ID, Idana, Upala all have novel solutions. I don't think any are at huge scale yet, but they're certainly being used and experimented with in varying degrees. It's a really hard problem to scale up because the things that work early on, sub 150, basically each order of magnitude, the ways that you need to organize and motivate and coordinate checks against intruders get really different. Early on, it can be a few people checking it. Later on, you can start to federate a little bit. but by the end, it needs to be basically purely algorithm based. And so it's a really hard theoretical problem, but then also a really hard practical problem for a team to kind of scale up with usage.
Humpty, I know that you've been interviewing us and sort of exploring the design space. I'm wondering if you could just take a minute and just tell us about how Ontology thinks about these things and the tools and services you're trying to provide. I know that you're the host of this, and I don't want to put you in too much of a shill mode, but I'd just love to know, you're obviously spending a lot of time thinking about this too. So if I can turn the tables and just interview you for a sec, what's Ontology's sort of North Star, and what do you all think about this space?
Certainly, I'd love to talk about that. So Ontology is focused on developing, a chain for self-sovereign identity and data. And they're serving that mission through the development of a suite of protocols and products. Some of those are OntID, which is the decentralized identity protocol that's based on the W3C standard. OScore, which is your on-chain or self-sovereign credit score, and OntoWallet, which is the multi-chain wallet. Actually, I'm a big fan of the wallet. I think, well, first of all, I'll talk about this is a suite of products to make sure that, we create an accessible solution for people to create an identity and then take that identity across blockchains. And the reason why I like OntoWallet, I'm a huge fan of it, is, one, you can, besides it being available both as a mobile and browser plugin, it so far has been one of the easiest ways I've found to create your decentralized identity. You create your wallet, and your identity, your DID or OntID, is created along with that. And that OntID has already been integrated onto multiple blockchains. Right now, I think it's on Typeform Ontology, is also on Ethereum. It's on Binance Smart Chain. It's on Near Protocol. It's being integrated onto Polkadot, which I'm hugely excited about, because Polkadot is a really interesting project too. I think what they're doing is extremely important, which is connecting, these chains, creating, this interoperable ecosystem. So that's part of it. There are other applications built on top of Ontology. One is Wing, which is a lending market that has already built a proof of concept called Inclusive Pool. And what that does is it enables you to use your self-sovereign credit to access more rewarding and higher incentives depending on your reputation. So, are you a good lender? Are you defaulting on these loans? If not, then your reputation increases, and you're able to access much more rewarding experiences. And the goal, of course, and because OntID is multi-chain, is you're able to take this onto other blockchains, this identity to other blockchains, and track your behavior there too, right? Are you a degen or are you a responsible borrower? I think there's value to both, but in terms of, increasing reputation, certainly you want to be someone in good standing. And then Saga would be another platform that's being built where individuals can access their data and monetize that data as well. So the user controls all this information. So that's, kind of in a nutshell what Ontology is working on. I think one of the special things about all of these products, particularly OntID and OScore, is the strategic partnerships that are being built around it to make it more dynamic and more useful to the people who own their identities. I certainly, it's open to everyone here on this panel, and we can talk about that off air, how we can find a way to integrate, the data that's being produced, like on Gitcoin and RabbitHole, and take that information cross-chain. So that's a little bit about, what Ontology is doing. In terms of what I am doing, is doing exactly this, really connecting, people who are thinking about this through DeID Summit, which is a community initiative really to advance decentralized identity through education and conversations. And as head of community with Ontology is to make sure that the community itself understands what is being built, not just at Ontology, but decentralized identity in general, and so that they can learn how to be active participants. All right. So I don't know, Brian, Daniel, Kevin, any other things we wanted to talk about here before bringing people up? I do see a hand raised already. As we open it up, we'll encourage people to come up and ask questions.
Yeah, we'd love to hear the questions.
Excellent. All right. Just a reminder to everyone, this is a recorded event, so be aware of that. We have our first question here being asked by Matthias. So I'm going to bring you up to the stage. I do ask everybody when they come up, if there's more than one guest up here, one audience member up here, please mute yourself until you've been called to ask your question. So Matthias, welcome to the stage.
Hi, Humpty, Bryan. How are you guys doing? I kind of came in the middle of this Clubhouse meeting. So I don't know if you guys have discussed this, but so my question is related to something I worked in last year, where we were trying to create a decentralized ID on sovereign network to help people who get vaccinated to have a privacy of their data, and they can be verified without exposing a lot of information. So my main question is, do you guys see like a winner take all kind of approach for decentralized identities, or do you guys expect like there is going to be like multiple identity platforms that could hopefully be like interoperable in the future? This also brings up the idea of, hey, like if you have like two different identities in two different networks, maybe like you can game different systems to take advantage of those things. So how do you guys see the approach of having maybe like multiple decentralized identity platforms, but they can talk to each other and identify you like as a one person, like the way we identify ourselves in physical passport or government IDs? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I can kick it off. Personally, I'm a huge fan of interoperability. So just like, one blockchain takes all, I think that there are going to be multiple decentralized identity solutions. Just like you currently probably have several different forms of identity on you right now, not just government identities, but, you have, the electrical bill, you have, these different issuers of identity, and who then can verify who you are and your behavior or activity on their platforms. So for me, I personally think that there's a lot of value to these multiple identity solutions, but the real value will come in terms of integrating these to create a much richer identity of who you are. I think we touched on that a little bit earlier in the call, where we were talking about how, it's multifaceted, right? And the more information that can be gathered about your behavior, the better picture that can be drawn and the better your reputation, that can be served to whoever's trying to verify this information. Those are my thoughts. I don't know, Brian, Daniel, Kevin, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I basically completely agree. There's super strong network effects to identity if you think about identity as linked information. So at least having interoperability and a few common standards seems necessary. But interoperability is hard. The more we achieve it, the more there can be the combination of kind of competition and diverse actors, but still able to have those network effects and some of the benefits of it. But I don't think it's winner take all for sure, because if you just think about the number of different applications there are for identity or the number of places it's required, there's just too many different needs for a single standard to work. And so I think we'll have plenty of different solutions serving different use cases. And as Humpty said, the more we can make those interoperate well, the better off everybody is.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Matthias. The other question we have is from Russell. Welcome. I know I saw you in another channel earlier today, and we had a really great chat one-on-one, so I am really looking forward to your question.
Hey, Humpty, appreciate you. Thanks for reaching out to me earlier. Had a super good conversation. I was just super excited to hear Bryan was coming on. I mean, even before I talked to you, I'm a huge fan of RabbitHole and everything you guys are doing, basically gamifying the education process. So that was awesome to hear. And thank you for that, Bryan. My question today is just with everything going on and exploring decentralized reputation, I'm really interested to hear how the dApps interact with it and how that exactly is going to work with different blockchains. There's a ton of different protocols out right now. So I guess my question to you guys is, what are your thoughts, or which ones are going to be onboarded first? Which ones are going to adopt this decentralized reputation type of scoring, and how will they interact with one another?
Hey, Russell, thanks for your kind of comments on RabbitHole. I can take this from like an application perspective, but I think Danny might have more perspective here in terms of like the protocols themselves, because Ceramic has been working with them directly. So I think eventually RabbitHole will migrate away from wallets being the primary identity-driven thing and move towards DIDs. And so because DIDs is actually blockchain agnostic, and then to just be able to plug in different credentials from these different blockchains itself, right? And that will be sort of your reputation instead of just your wallet. In terms of the actual protocols, I think, I don't know, Dan, if you want to talk about this, but probably more perspective here than I do.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. And then maybe I'll kick it back to you because I'm super curious to hear where you're excited to hear apps actually use these. But in terms of kind of cross-protocol reputation, if we come back to like identity is linking information to an identifier, like a blockchain key is an identity in that way. You've got your key and it's linked to a bunch of on-chain information, but it's a super fragile identity because users change keys or they want to go use other experiences, and kind of all of that data is siloed and not really usable. And so the DIDs that Bryan mentioned, W3C standard for decentralized identifiers, that basically does a bunch of things, but among them provides an abstraction away from individual key pairs, so that the unique identifier you're using isn't tied to just one key, and that means it doesn't also have to be tied to just one blockchain. And so, as Humpty talked about with ontology, similar for Ceramic, you can start to link multiple keys from multiple blockchains to the same identifier. And then if the identifier is then the thing that's controlling off-chain data and can be resolved through the keys to the on-chain data, you can start to run reputation algorithms on top of multiple different protocols at once in various ways. And so, you're right, there's tons of protocols now and lots of them going live, and it's super exciting. I don't pretend to have any special insight into which ones are going to really pick up usage. We're excited about anything where there's developers building cool things. So seeing lots of NFT stuff on Flow, and people are super excited about Polkadot. We're working with Moonbeams in that ecosystem. And so, I think there is starting to be like real use cases across all of these. I don't know which will require reputation and which will have the most interoperability first, but we're definitely ready for that as applications and usage starts to bloom.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys. That really was insightful and super helpful.
Humpty, thank you for hosting this, and thanks all who were listening in. Apologies, I have a hard stop and have to run, so have to drop. But I'm on Twitter if anybody has other questions or want to connect, and happy to do this again. This was fun.
Thank you, Kevin. I know many of us have a hard stop right about now, so this is a good place to close the event. I wanted to thank all of our guests for participating in today's event. Kevin Owocki with Gitcoin, Danny Zuckerman with 3boxLabs, and Bryan Flynn with RabbitHole. make sure that you give each of them a follow. And if you have any questions on decentralized identity, make sure you give at DeID Summit a follow on Twitter and the DeID Club on Clubhouse. And stay tuned for many more events that we'll be hosting in the future as well. Until next time, goodbye.